Well, here we are. I'm in the UK, sunburnt, been paddling on the sea, and he is looking as glamorous and handsome as ever. Show 19, and I reckon he's got his Showtime cap on. Dan Rayfield. Oh, look, you're back to Lewis and Tyson.
Back to Lewis. Well, because Tyson's going to be part of what we're discussing, so I figured it's good for Tyson.
Well, look, let's go there. I mean, you extraordinarily, Mike Tyson, 8-round exhibition bout against Roy Jones Jr., 130-odd fights between them, 4 weight divisions for Roy Jones, all the way up to heavyweight from middleweight. Mike Tyson, the youngest heavyweight champion in history, age 22 in 1986. And you've already spoken to Roy Jones Jr. You're an animal. What did he got to say? What do you think?
Well, first, we'll just set the stage here. As became news today when they announced that Roy Jones and Mike Tyson were going to face each other, as you mentioned, in an 8-round exhibition on September 12th in Carson, California. I saw some quotes in one of the stories from Andy Foster, who's the executive director of the California Commission. So they've signed off on this. They're going to call it an exhibition. I guess they're going to wear larger gloves, but they're not going to wear headgear. I have to say this, in one of the quotes I saw from Andy Foster, he said, well, these guys are going to get in the ring. They're going to move around a little bit. It's not going to be a real fight. The fans are going to see 2 legends. And I'm like, well, I know Mike Tyson. I know Roy Jones. And I don't think that's going to be quite legit. So I had an opportunity to talk to Roy Jones just before we come on doing this recording. I've known Roy for as long as I've known Tyson, 20-some years. And when I read that quote to Roy, and he laughed. He's like, no, you know Mike Tyson, you know Roy Jones. We come to fight. And at some point in this discussion, he's like, it's kill or die. That's like the mantra.
David and Goliath, isn't it?
They're there, in Roy's mind, he's there to fight. He says, we're going to give the fans what they paid for. So, maybe that's pre-hype if you want, but if you know Roy Jones, he's never not come to fight. Tyson is Tyson. I mean, we don't know at their ages, in their 50s at this point, Roy 51, Tyson, 54, what they can still do. We've seen the training videos that Mike's put up. I asked Roy, I said, Roy, since your last fight, which he had against Scott Sigmund, a number of months ago, where he said that was it was going to be his last fight. He says, I was done. I was retired. I kept getting phone calls about this, and I got opportunities to go here and to go there, to do this exhibition, to go to Saudi Arabia. It's like, I turned it all down. I was all done. And he said, I'm paraphrasing, he's like, when Mike Tyson calls you and says, let's fight, what are you going to do? He made the point that when he had won the heavyweight belt in the early 2000s, when he defeated John Ruiz, there was other opportunities for him to fight at heavyweight. There was some talk of him and Lennox Lewis at the time. There was talk of him and Evander Holyfield, which was a deal that was actually close to maybe even being made. But the reality is, from what Roy said, and he's said this steadfast for as long as I've known him, the one guy he wanted to fight was Mike Tyson. So when Mike and his people got in touch with Roy, he said about a month ago, 3 weeks ago, to try to set this up, he couldn't say no. So he's not coming out of retirement for the long haul. He doesn't have any plans or desires to do anything beyond this one exhibition with Tyson. But when Iron Mike Tyson calls and wants to fight you, you say yes. And he's sounded excited about it. I asked him if he'd been in the gym. He said, I've been in the gym every day training, not necessarily sparring or setting up for a fight, but the combination of his own desire to be in the gym, plus the fact that he trains, some young fighters here and there, keeps him busy working out in the boxing gym. And so, given that this is not going to be until September, I assume that for his age and his long career, he'll be in as good a shape as he can be in at this point. And, we've seen Tyson. Look, my hope is, I don't love the idea of it because I like Mike. I like Roy. I don't want somebody to get hurt or anything. It's like they've had their day. They've been great champs and all that. But they're grown men. The commission sanctions it. If it's an exhibition, they decide they want to do it. They're on the same level physically and in terms of their age and their abilities physically. What can you do? The fans will enjoy it, I suppose.
Well, the first promo's out, and Roy Jones Jr. saying it's in God's hands and it's David versus Goliath, and Mike Tyson so intimidated, going, "You think I'm going to make a fool of myself?" And he's really serious about it, and that wild emotion and is in his eyes already. Look, like you said, he'd been busting a few moves with Rafael Cordero down there in California, and he runs this great cannabis farm retreat at the moment. So are we going to get Iron Mike Tyson? Maybe he can't test positive for marijuana before he fights, can he?
I don't know.
No, they can now, can't they?
Yeah.
So Mike's going to have a little smoke in the dressing room. Yeah.
Well, first of all, being that it's an exhibition, I'm not sure if it falls under the same. I mean, I have to check the rules. I'll call up the California Commission. And I'll ask. But given the fact that the status of this is an exhibition, I'm not sure if it follows exactly the same protocol in terms of drug testing as it would if it was an actual official boxing match.
Listen, Mike Tyson is going to be exhibiting K&O on Roy Jones Jr.'s body and head. I'm predicting, even though everyone will go, Mike's going to catch him after a couple of rounds. There'll be a little bit of feeling out. I predict it'll go the full 8 rounds.
Well, here's what Roy said to me about that on our phone call that we had a little while ago. He said, I've got to survive the first 3, and after that, Mike's got to survive the rest of the way, because Roy making the point that if obviously Tyson, he knows he's the bigger puncher and then the more physically brutal guy. But Roy, even all things being equal at their stages, even when they were at their peaks, clearly Roy is the better boxer, and probably has better stamina, and that so if you're hearkening back to their heyday or even now in their older days, the conventional wisdom would seem to be Tyson early, Roy Jones, if he can extend him, could probably outbox him a bit, and maybe clip him, because Mike hasn't been hit by a big punch in a long time either. So I can't believe we're having this conversation.
No, I was just about to say that. I said, have I been asleep for 20 years? And I've just,
I'm thinking about this. I'm like, what the hell are we talking about? We're talking about Roy Jones and Mike Tyson.
But weirdly, go back 20 years and it was a fantasy fight. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So as you were talking about it there, I was wanting to move further away from the screen and think, am I in a parallel universe here?
I'm taking it seriously based on the mission and the announcement and what Roy said to me. So you got to take it serious from that standpoint. But part of me is like, you got to be shitting me. This is not happening.
Do you know what? If it's $20, it would not surprise me if this did like 500,000 views on YouTube.
They haven't given the price point yet. They haven't made that. Yeah. But what Roy said to me, he said, we got it worked out, but he basically, without giving away the particulars, said we're both working for what we can sell. In other words, there's no promoter to guarantee, I'll give you 10 million and we'll work on the upside. No, these guys, maybe there'll be a nominal guarantee from a sponsor or, some kind of promoter or whatever. But basically, I based on the way that Roy was saying it to me, they'd probably come up with some sort of percentage agreement to split whatever they can profit on the event. And they'll go from there. And they're going to put on some other exhibition matches on the undercard. I didn't talk to Roy about this in particular, but like Jake Paul is supposed to be on there against somebody or other. So
I think it's against an NBA player or something, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
And Snoop Dogg's involved as well, isn't he, in some weird way with this?
It'll be a train wreck probably, but if you're interested in just seeing crazy stuff, or you have an interest in Roy Jones or Mike Tyson, they're 2 of the biggest names of the
last 25 years.
Yeah, I mean, in the history of boxing, they're 2 of the biggest names, whether it's 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. I mean, they're 2 of the all-time most well-known fighters ever, accomplished Hall of Famers. And the thing that, like you mentioned a little while ago, what makes it quasi-interesting for people, I think, is that at their day, this was a fight that people talked about at some point. When Roy Jones won the heavyweight belt from John Ruiz in 2003 or so, Tyson was still fighting, although at the end of his career. There was a lot of popular demand and discussion for that fight. It didn't happen. And here we are, now almost 20 years later, and it'll happen obviously in a much diminished fashion for no stakes in terms of championships and legacy and all that, as an 8-rounder with bigger gloves and all that, but no headgear. And, we'll see what we can do. Like I said, I can't believe we're even having this conversation. But we give the viewers what they want.
Absolutely. So if the air bridge is working by then and I can fly to America, I think there's a Bellator event in Mohegan that might be Chris Cyborg that night or whatever as well. I think it's a Saturday night, isn't it?
Well, what's interesting about that, the date that they said, which is September 12th.
Is a Friday, is it?
No, that's a Saturday, and that would theoretically have been the Canelo Alvarez Saturday night for the Mexican Independence Day weekend. So if they're taking that date,
it's not sensible, is it? It's not sensible.
I'm not saying that Canelo and Golden Boy and DAZN wouldn't go on that date also, because obviously that's a big deal in boxing also, but why would they take them and compete against one another?
Yeah, I agree.
in mind, by the way, Canelo Alvarez fighting on the Mexican Independence Day weekend takes on less importance if you don't have a crowd, because the whole cachet of having the big fights for Canelo on either the Cinco de Mayo weekend or the Mexican Independence weekend in September was that the Mexican fans, both from Mexico and America, would flock to Las Vegas for the holiday weekend, party, drink, hang out.
And the drop for Vegas.
And gamble, of course, gamble. That goes without saying. And then buy tickets for the big fight and buy T-shirts and make a big weekend party out of it. But if there's nobody going to Vegas in those kinds of droves because there can't be a crowd in the arena, you know, who cares if the fight's on September 12th? They could have it on September whatever, or October, or November, whatever.
Yeah, and just on that, while you mentioned Canelo, and we'll wrap up on Jones and Tyson in a minute. Jones and Tyson
I mean, come on.
Well, this is a special day, so I want to know what's for dinner tonight, right? Okay, because this is an extraordinary. No.
Gareth, as we tape this, my wife and son are out on a distance play date for my son with his buddy from his school, and there's been zero conversation about what's for dinner. I swear.
I never believe you.
That's fine.
I think there's a family menu made every Sunday evening by your wife, but
absolutely
you just never tell me about it.
That I can 100% deny. No chance.
I'm going to get her on Zoom and actually interview her, interrogate her about this, because
Will you write a story about it in the Telegraph?
There's no question at all. And I'll even reveal it first to Boxing Scene, so they trail it. And Ring, and maybe a retrospective piece on ESPN about you.
What were you going to say now? You were saying before we wrap up on...
Yeah, on Canelo. Obviously, it's not Billy Joe Saunders. I'm trying to think who was in the frame now. But, John Ryder, Callum Smith.
Well, and John Ryder.
Jason Quigley.
I'm told that Jason Quigley and John Ryder are not real possibilities. They were names that were tossed out there. That the name that Golden Boy and Canelo and DAZN can probably all settle on would be Callum Smith. It's a matter of finalizing the money.
Yeah. Eddie's confirmed they've had an offer, but I think they've got to do the money now. And it's a good fight. It's
a very good fight. I mean, Callum is an undefeated guy. You know, at worst, he has one loss, which would have been to Ryder in a fight that a lot of people thought he didn't win. But his overall body of work, his victory in the World Boxing Super Series, and his having a world title, and coming from a very well-respected boxing family. If you're Canelo Alvarez and you're fighting in the super middleweight division, among the makeable fights with available opponents who are willing to do it for the money that's available, that's probably the best fight that they can do with him. I'm not saying it's my personal fight that I want to see the most for Canelo, but I'm good with Callum Smith. Who wouldn't be? He's an undefeated champion, and he's a hell of a fighter, and why not? I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And keep in mind also, as I mentioned to you, Stu, on a past one of our videos, in conjunction with whenever Canelo goes into the ring, DAZN is announcing an expansion into a number of worldwide markets, including the UK. It's very important for them in the UK, knowing what a great boxing country it is, to have something that's going to entice the British viewers by their subscription, because it's no secret that if Callum Smith is the opponent, this is not a Matchroom card. So Matchroom, although it has their contract to give their events to Sky for either pay-per-view or for regular Sky channel, this is a Golden Boy event. They have a deal with DAZN. So this would be Canelo versus Callum Smith streamed on DAZN in the UK, not on Sky,
right?
Television program. So that would make it a very attractive fight, not only for British fans because of the fact that they have Canelo, but also because he's fighting one of the UK's top undefeated world champions. So it makes all the sense in the world.
As we're talking about Canelo, I'm just going to celebrate with
I'm going to celebrate with my water.
I'm going to have a little shot of tequila because it's late at night here and we're talking Canelo. Cheers, Canelo.
Cheers, Canelo. And cheers to Roy Jones and Mike Tyson.
So, now I hope that does go ahead. And I think we'll be having media by mid-September at these events as well.
I hope so. I mean, that would be ideal.
They need it, Dan. They need it. I mean, I've had some great Zoom calls with Bellator recently, and UFC are doing it. And Eddie Hearn, we've had 2 press conferences this week, conference calls on Zoom with Terry Harper and Natasha Jonas, who are fighting soon, of course, in his garden.
It's not going to depend on whether we want to be there or whether the promoters want us to be there or the venues or the commission. It comes down to what the government says. In California, for example, like with Roy Jones and Tyson, California right now has a massive surge in cases of the coronavirus. It just passed in terms of the numbers of cases. It became the #1 state in the United States with the most cases. It just, like in the last day or so, surpassed the total number of cases in New York, which is where it was so bad early on. So California is really in a bad state it's a bad way right now. Yes, September.
They're not wearing masks, Dan.
Well, that's part of the stupidity of many of my countrymen.
And my prediction, the biggest prediction of the year, unfortunately for you guys, Trump's going to get in again.
Let's not go there, but I don't agree with you.
I'm sorry. I've seen it in the stars. I saw it the first time.
All right,
listen,
moving on.
I know, moving on. It's very sad news. That is the saddest news that I could possibly give you.
I just don't think it's happening. If it does happen, I may have to move to the UK.
I had a great chat with you're very welcome here. Bring the family. But I do a menu on a Sunday night and we stick to it.
At least we'll have some clarity ahead of time.
I had some lovely haddock tonight with corn that I'd cut off the cob.
My wife does that. Great when you cut it off the cob. Put a little saute.
Saute courgettes. Anyway, it's not a cooking show. Although maybe we will have a cooking show one day. Once you start bloody revealing what you have for dinner. I had a great chat to Joe Joyce, who's been cycling. I don't know if you know Joe very well. You will have met him in Vegas, and obviously
I know Joe.
Not to win Olympic gold in Rio. But he had a very close fight with Tony Yoka, didn't he? He's a super guy, Joe. He's a mellow dude. He's a giant. They call him the Juggernaut. He hasn't got the fastest hands in the world, but he's got a great chin. And he's like a sock and rock and robot, you know?
Yeah.
And we're all looking forward to him fighting Daniel Dubois in October. He's got Michael Wallace on Saturday night. I'm doing the live commentary for Talk Sport on it, actually. And then we've got a 3-hour show. I wouldn't mind getting you on that show on Saturday night, by the way.
Happy to join.
There's so much to talk about. Love to have you on.
I mean, most people don't think that Wallace fight is a huge.
Oh, it's a test.
A test for him, but everybody knows it's sort of a tune-up. I mean, Dubois is going to have his tune-up in August, and then because they've been off for so long, they were supposed to have fought each other a few months ago. Let them get their tune-up in, and then we'll see the big fight in October. I'm happy to say that the Joyce fight, if you're in America, you get a chance to see it, because not only is it going to stream on ESPN Plus Live, but then the regular network is going to show it on tape delay, later that evening, so you can watch it either on Plus or on the regular cable.
That's great.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I've interviewed Joe a few times when I used to host the Boxing Beat on ESPN Plus. When ESPN Plus first launched, I had Joe as one of my guests. He was at the time training up in Big Bear, California, with Abel Sanchez.
Correct.
Before his American debut, he fought on one of the PBC Fox cards. So I had a very good interview with him at that point. And him and Dubois is a very good for a fight in the heavyweight division that does not include the top contenders, or either a Fury, a Wilder, or a Joshua. That is a fight that's going to sort of separate those two guys. Who's going to take that next big step forward, and let them have their tune-ups. If one of them gets beat in the tune-up in an upset,
they build again.
They're building it up in a.
Joe's 35. Remember, that's what he was telling me. He's 35, so stayed amateur for a long time. He's a fine art graduate as well.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's a fascinating character. His mother is blind. She has a degenerative eye condition. I think he's got about 9 brothers and sisters. She's beautiful, his mum. Beautiful woman.
You hit it right on the head, though, by the way. You said Joe's like a real mellow guy.
He is.
I would say that not in the ring, outside the ring, just as a guy, he's like the giant.
He's beautiful. He's a beautiful person, genuinely. He was talking to me about, he went to this lockdown, he went to a party after lockdown recently, and he's gone into the bubble now, obviously. We're hearing everything's fine in the bubble. This video's going out 48 hours before these guys fight. They've still got to do the last test before the weigh-in. That must be dreading. They must think, God, did I wash my hands when I went to that shared toilet? All of that kind of stuff. No, do you know what I mean? It's so easy. He said he had these midnight rides where he'd been spotting foxes and stuff. He lives out in the countryside in the southwest of London. But like he said, Michael Wallace's game, even the guy that Dubois facing Eric Pfeiffer. I saw him at the London Olympics. He's game. He's a game Eastern European. He's a tough guy. If the person that wins, for me, the longer that fight goes with Dubois, the better for Joyce. If the one that wins that fight starts to get talked about in that top 6, 7, 8 mix, you know?
Yeah, I would agree with that. In an unbiased group of ratings, the guy who wins Joyce Dubois
is in the top 10. Is in the top 10.
Exactly. I don't know where they'll be. It'll depend
Correct.
on the results of some other fights that may take place also, like Dillian White will have fought by then with Povetkin, and the Chisora fight will have happened with Usyk, et cetera. But like you said, the winner of that fight, if it happens, is going to have proven themselves to be top 10 worthy, at the lower probably.
Yeah. One of the things that Eddie Hearn said to me this week, but just on the heavyweights for a moment, and I think it's interesting, they're starting to plan for 2,000 people in the arena. Eddie's father, Barry, runs...
For October, you're talking about, right?
October for Derek Chisora and Usyk, Alexander Usyk.
Yeah.
Derek!
Listen, hopefully they can have some fans in there. If it's 2,000, that's better than 0.
Exactly. And it needs a gate, but it might be people paying a lot more money. Equally, he's looking at the O2 Arena, maybe even for 2,000 with Fury and Pulev, with Joshua and Pulev. I don't think they'll go with that number.
Well, one thing I don't quite get is, it's good if you can have an arena with some fans for the fight, but why would you need the O2? You don't need a 20,000
space people.
You can have an arena that's much smaller than and still keep people apart from each other. You don't need a 20,000 seat arena for 2,000 people.
Yeah, that's a good point. But
because that raises the cost also.
Yeah, this is true.
Socially distance 2,000 people across the street, at the from the big Wembley Stadium at the Wembley Arena. I'll leave that up to those guys. They're the promoters. That's exactly.
Well, we had a conference call with Eddie Hearn the other day, and he was saying, yeah, you can do that story then and that story then. I said, Eddie, when I want you to be my editor, I'll ring you. And he went, if I was your editor, you'd have been sacked already. It was a great riposte. Joe Joyce Saturday night, BT Sport Live, and on in America on Network and ESPN Plus, which I think is amazing. We have got Showtime's back and the Mohegan Sun, where Bellator begin tomorrow night as well. They got 4 events starting Friday. Then they've got 2 in August, and then September the 11th, a Friday, or September the 11th or 12th. But Showtime are going to share that, aren't they?
Showtime is going to be in the bubble at the Mohegan Sun. Speaking of Zoom calls, Showtime had a Zoom call for the media a couple days ago, or yesterday, I guess it was, which would have been on Wednesday, or it was Tuesday, whatever day it was. It was Boxing Press, but it was Steve Espinoza, who runs Showtime Sports, along with Chris de Blasio, who runs his communications department, Brian Custer, their host, who was the moderator of this thing, and they announced a slate of fights that goes from August 1 all the way through December. It's their schedule essentially for the rest of the year. Espinoza made the point that they'll probably add some additional events like the Claressa Shields fights and Showbox fights, and they have some undercard fights that haven't been solidified and an opponent here or there that hasn't been solidified. But what they did was they announced like 9 events, 20 plus fights from August 1st through December 12th. They're all supposed to take place at the Mohegan Sun in Uncasville, Connecticut. But he did make the point when asked about it that depending on what the status of the virus situation is in America, if they're able to go elsewhere, if they're able to have some fans, that it's not out of the realm of possibility that they could, where some of those fights at the later end of that schedule, move to a place where maybe it makes more sense. But they're perfectly happy to be at a very nice casino resort like the Mohegan Sun, where I've been on a number of occasions. In first class place. They haven't really had a lot of major fights at Mohegan Sun in a long time.
Bellator have been there 22 times.
But they've had a lot of boxing, like some lesser, like the old Friday night fights on ESPN2 type shows. But it's famous because it was the host casino for the first Gatti Ward fight.
That's right.
Over some fights there, Devin Alexander had a unification with Juan Urango. They've hosted their share. It's just been a while since they've had it at the top level. Now they've got all these Showtime fights, and we can run through them. There's some excellent fights, some good fights, some lesser fights, but they got a little bit for everybody.
The great Katie Taylor trains 20 miles away from there in a little town. The great thing about the place, I think it's the 3rd biggest casino resort in America.
It's a pretty darn big.
WinStar Casino in Thackerville is the biggest, I think. I can't remember, but I think it's the 3rd biggest. The great thing about it is they're able to requisition, because I know that Bellator's relationship is very strong with Mohegan. Now, obviously, Espinoza will have had those talks with them. Mike Mazzulli is the commissioner there, and he was the head of the commission in America at one time.
He was the head of the
ABC.
as the head of the ABC.
Yeah.
But his day job, the daily job, is as the head of the Mohegan Sun Tribal Commission.
Exactly. So, and as we know, people ain't watching this know generally, but they are under their own legal system.
Yeah, no, but they do a good. They're under their own. There's also a Connecticut commission, but because they're on Native American tribal grounds, they run their own commission. Same like the folks that do, in upstate New York at Verona at the Turning Stone Casino, or any number of some of the tribal lands where fights are take place in this country. Some of the places, Oklahoma, whatever. But they are very experienced at regulating fights. And Mohegan Sun is very experienced at hosting events. And by the way, the reason for Mohegan Sun to be the host of both Showtime and Bellator is because they're now owned by the same parent company.
Well, the other thing to explain as well, the reason why we're talking about Showtime and Bellator in the same breath is that CBS Viacom owns both. They're part of Paramount, but it's in a way it's like they are promoters within a massive media conglomerate.
Yeah.
Scott Coker was his own promoter. Stephen's been an exemplary. I think he's one of the most wonderful TV executives I've ever met.
Well, now Scott Coker reports to Stephen Espinoza.
That's right.
So, but we should get into the fights though, because that's
yes, please. Drive away.
I will drive away. We'll get your take on some of this. So the first fight that they have is on when it kicks off August 1st. And it's not maybe the most well-known guys in the world, but on paper, it's a very evenly matched fight. It's for good stakes. They're fighting Stephen Fulton, kid from Philadelphia, fighting Angelo Leo, who's promoted by Floyd Mayweather's company. And they are fighting for the WBO's 122-pound title, which was recently vacated by Emmanuel Navarrete, who was moving up in weight. So they're the next two rated guys in the WBO. They're both young, undefeated type fighters. They both have been on some of the undercards of Showtime type events, Showbox events. Young in their 20s, good matchup. I mean, it's, the winner can really make himself into a player in that weight class. And they also added a couple of undercard fights, not the most well-known guys. Tremaine Williams, he's had some issues in and out of jail, et cetera, so he hasn't had that many pro fights. But he's a junior featherweight. He's taken on a guy named Rais Alim, and they got a rematch between an upset from one of their Showbox cards earlier in the year between Joe George and Marcos Izquierdo. But the main fight, of course, the attraction fight is Fulton and Angelo Leo. Good fight.
No media, no audience, yeah?
That is correct. Now, that could change, as they stated, on the Zoom call, depending on what the status of things in the United States are. Perhaps they'll have, they didn't really say so much about fans at this point, but it's possible they may have a handful of press that are allowed into the bubble as long as they follow the same kind of rules and regulations that everybody else does.
Do you think, was there any talk, because the British media weren't on that call, we haven't had our invite yet.
Yeah.
Is there talk about getting those events shown in Europe as well?
They haven't talked about that specifically, but I would hope that the outlets over there, PBC not that long ago had made a big thing how they had some kind of deal. I think it was with
ITV with Richard.
Hopefully they'll pick some of those shows up, and if they don't, hopefully Skywood or Box Nation or whoever, I can't really speak to that. But the next event, so basically what they're doing is essentially 2 events a month. So the second event for August is on the 15th, and this is one of the fights that was scheduled earlier in the year that was postponed because of the coronavirus and when it originally shut everything down. And it's the rescheduled fight between David Benavidez, the unbeaten super middleweight WBC champion, against Romer Alexis Angulo, whose only loss as a professional was by a decision in a world title fight against Gilberto Ramirez a few years ago. But since then, he pulled off a very big upset against Anthony Sims on one of Eddie Hearn's cards that was down in Florida earlier this year. Very, very big upset. And so he basically got himself into this world title position.
Sure, yeah.
He's taken on Benavidez, who's one of the most, for my money anyway, one of the most exciting young fighters in boxing. And they have some two fights they announced for that undercard. It's
up to 168, yeah, obviously.
168, yeah, for the WBC title. One of the co-feature is a Orlando Romero against Jackson Marinez. It's for a interim lightweight belt. And then the opening fight, which is, I like this fight. It's kind of like a scrappy, kind of messy, kind of heavyweight fight that'll just be probably like just a slobber knocker kind of fight. Otto Whalen, who we know from the Tyson Fury the big fight he had with Tyson where he gave a great effort but came up just a bit short. He's fighting Travis Kaufman, who's a battle tested, I don't call him a journeyman, but like a
very decent heavyweight
gatekeeper, but he can fight a little bit. Yeah. He can pull the upset here and there. What's interesting about that fight is they're two guys that both had COVID-19, and they're better now, and now they're going to fight each other. And the winner will, will keep himself alive in a heavyweight division and probably get another good assignment as the opponent. And then they go into the month of September 19th, main event. This is a WBC junior middleweight elimination fight. Erickson Lubin, who was my prospect of the year a few years ago, taking on the U.S. Olympian Terrell Gausha. They're in an eliminator. Lubin I've seen the videos he's had on his social media. He's down there in Florida where he lives, training with Kevin Cunningham like an animal, with Kevin's fine group of guys. And, Gausha doesn't usually make the best fights in the world, but hopefully they can make a pretty interesting match. They were two top amateurs, and hopefully we'll see what happens. It's an opportunity really for Lubin to continue that trek since that loss to Charlo, to get back in a position to fight for one of the world titles.
I'll tell you what, I wouldn't mind getting a free room at the Mohegan for 6 months, because you could literally go all the way from, maybe for 3 months.
Yeah.
You could literally, because for someone like me that covers boxing and MMA, you could get yourself quite busy, because I imagine Bellator will announce their next 4 then, because literally every weekend there's either going to be boxing or MMA. And from the sound of it, and I don't know whether there will be an overlap, there might be some Friday night Bellators and Saturday night Showbox
schedule, so it's hard to say, but it would maybe make sense that they would do the MMA events on the weeks where they're not doing the boxing events, but you never know. But just to round out that card on the 19th, the 2 undercard fights, they got Tug Nayanviar, featherweight contender, who just lost a title fight to Gary Russell earlier this year. He's taking on Eduardo Ramirez in a WBC eliminator to get an opportunity to fight for the title. For Nayanviar, would be a chance to get a second shot. And then on the opening fight for that show, they got the young welterweight prospect, Jaron Ennis. His opponent is not set yet, but Jaron Ennis is one of the best prospects in the whole sport of boxing. A very dynamic, explosive, skillful guy. Just needs to have a little more activity. And they have a hard time finding opponents for this guy because no one wants to fight him. But that guy, you can write it down. He's going to probably be a world champion in the not too distant future if you can get the opportunity. But that's that triple header. And their centerpiece, I guess, if you could call it that, for the first half of these comeback shows is on September 26th. And the way that they're positioning it, it's a pay-per-view, on Showtime pay-per-view. Among the events that they announced, they got 2 pay-per-views. The rest are all regular Showtime. But this one on the 26th, they're doing, it's like a double header pay-per-view. In other words, they got 3 fights that will take place on pay-per-view in the afternoon, have a short break in between the first half and the second half. They'll come back a little while later for 3 more fights on the evening part of the show. So it's 6 total fights, but you get it all for whatever one price that they decide. They haven't announced the price. And that card is a very good card. And they haven't decided which section. They've said which are the 3 fights on one side and which are the 3 fights on the other half. They haven't said which one is going to go first, which one is going to go second. So
they haven't decided yet.
No, they haven't decided yet. I don't think there's any hurry to that. But I'll run down the fights. The main event, if you will, of the one half is going to be Jermall Charlo against Sergey Derevyanchenko for Charlo's weight title. And the main event on the other half, whichever order they go in, is his twin brother, Jermell Charlo, in a 3-belt, 154-pound unification against Jason Rosario, who pulled the upset earlier this year in January, going to the hometown of Philadelphia and upsetting Julian J. Rock Williams to win those 2 belts. So by the time that night's over, they'll have a champion at 154 with the 3 belts. My friends at the Ring Magazine have said that because of their rating number 1 and 2, that the winner of that fight will be the Ring Magazine champion also. So that's a little added bonus to it. And then the other fights that they've put onto the show, you have Mario Barrios, Ryan Carl for the WBA's regular 140 title. Barrios defending that belt, obviously. Brandon Figueroa against Damian Vasquez for Figueroa's regular junior featherweight title. Diego Magdaleno against Isaac Cruz. And Danny Roman, who is now with PBC in a 10-rounder at junior featherweight, but his opponent is not set yet. So that's a pretty deep card. It's pay-per-view. Again, they didn't announce the price, but what Steve Espinoza said on our Zoom call when he was asked about the pricing, he said they haven't decided the exact dollar figure yet, but it would be, he used the word consistent with what typical pay-per-views have been. So I would expect it's going to be somewhere in that $60 to $70 range. I heard a lot of people on Twitter and social media and the other day, complaining about it not being worthy of pay-per-view. My take was, look, there's no gates for these fights. Someone's got to pay the money. They're at least the top 2 fights are outstanding fights. And if you don't like it, you don't have to watch. And if you haven't spent any money on pay-per-view this whole year other than the Wilder Fury second fight, so you might have a few dollars kicking around. So, support the sport, support the guys, and buy the fight.
Well, Dan sets a record on show 19 for reading out the entire schedule and
We're not done yet.
but mentioning more fighters on our show than we've ever mentioned before. Go on, keep going.
Okay, so now we go to October 10th.
I don't want to go all the way to December because I want some sleep tonight. Yeah.
Well, too bad. We got a couple more to do. We got Sergey Lipinets against.
Oh, lovely.
Khadratio Abdukakharov. This is for the interim IBF welterweight title that was made available because Spence was out injured. I'm not sure it's really necessary at this point since Errol is on his way back, but nonetheless, they're going to fight in the main event. That should be an action fight, even if they're not the most well-known guys. The undercard, this is a Mayweather promotion, some of their prospects. Xavier Martinez against Claudio Marrero, good test for Martinez. Malik Hawkins, an outstanding welterweight prospect from my neck of the woods up in Baltimore. He's taking on Sabril Matias, who was a big 140 knockout artist who got his first loss on the undercard, I believe, of the Wilder Fury event that was in February. And then we moved to the 24th. This is the second pay-per-view. They have not announced the undercard, just the main event. This is not a surprise. Gervonta Davis against Leo Santa Cruz.
Nice. I love that.
That's a good fight.
Now let's pause a second.
Let me just tell you a little bit more.
Better than a good fight. That's a great fight.
I don't know if I would use the word great.
Oh, I love it.
But look, I like the match. I've always felt like Santa Cruz with his height and his length and his volume of punches.
He will test Gervonta.
He can test Gervonta.
Proper test.
Yeah, maybe, and Gervonta, he's known not to always come in the best condition. So one of the things they're doing in this fight, they're doing a throwback almost to like the days of, if you remember, Sugar Ray Leonard against Donnie Lalonde, where they fought at 160-something as the max. It was not 168 maximum, but they fought for the super middleweight belt, but they also put at stake the WBC's light heavyweight belt. So Ray Leonard, when he won the fight, he got 2 titles from 2 different divisions in the night. Similarly, what they're doing with Davis and Santa Cruz, because Santa Cruz has one of the WBA belts at 130 pounds, right, and Gervonta has one of the belts at WBA belts at 135 pounds. The fight is contracted at 130, but both belts are on the line. I asked Steven on the Zoom call, I said, okay, that's cool. It's like a throwback to the Leonard Lalonde fight, but let's be honest, isn't it also kind of like a hedge in case Gervonta Davis doesn't make the weight?
4 pounds over or whatever, yeah.
So even if he doesn't make the weight, they'll still have the title at stake, even though there'll be financial penalties for.
He'll come in at 135.
We'll see. So now you want to talk about, that's a good matchup.
Well, the reason I like it is because Leo Santa Cruz is a real tough little warrior, but he's also technically brilliant as a counterpuncher. And I think, and if I'm right in thinking he's orthodox and Gervonta's southpaw, isn't he?
I think, well, he switches also.
He switches, but he likes southpaw, doesn't he? And I think I just like the chess match. It's going to be a chess match, but it's going to be a war at times as well. I just love the matchup. I do
too.
I favour Gervonta.
Yeah.
Just on wear and tear in lots of ways. Do you know what I mean?
And I suspect that they will add some worthwhile.
And he's the bigger man. I mean,
He is. They'll add some worthwhile undercards to that. Look, for Leo, it's an opportunity to win yet another title. He's been a champion at bantamweight, junior featherweight, junior weight. Here's a chance for him to win a title in a 5th weight class, which off the top of my head, I don't think has ever been done by a Mexican. Now, people will say, well, he's only he kind of won a cheap title at 130, whatever. But hey, the numbers are the numbers. The point is, though, it should be a fun fight. They both have their fan bases. Leo's popular, certainly among the Mexicans and the Mexican Americans, has his constituency that turns out for his fights. Gervonta draws from the black community. He's sold out arenas in Atlanta and in his hometown in Baltimore. He drew a big crowd in Los Angeles.
Got a narrative. There's a narrative around him.
He drew a big crowd in London when he came over there to fight.
Against Ryan Walsh,
It'll be a good fight. So
about Ryan Walsh,
Yeah, that's the second of the pay-per-views. And then they got 2 more after that. Go on November 28th, Chris Colbert, very stylish boxer, against Jaime Arboleda for Colbert's second-tier title at 130 pounds. Undercard, Richardson Hitchens, who was an Olympian in 2016, is one of Mayweather's top prospects from New York kid, fighting the former world title holder Argenis Mendez. Then they close out on December 12th. Again, they'll still add undercard bouts to that show, but the main event is set. It's a rescheduled fight from one of the pandemic postponed fights. It is the bantamweight title fight between Nordine Oubaali defending against the great Nonito Donaire. which is a
nice.
So that's the schedule. I mean, they rolled it all out yesterday, and it's very, very solid.
Well, what's lovely, Dan, is and thanks for providing all of that with us, all of that for us.
I couldn't remember it all, so I had to print it out just so I could put it in front of me.
But the nice thing is, we have all the major groups back now, and that it took them a long time because I was speaking to Scott Coker. I hadn't spoken to Stephen in the last few months, Stephen Espinosa. It took Viacom, CBS Viacom, a lot of time to come back, and he will have explained this to you guys. Not only to plan all that, but also the protocol that they had to go through within CBS Viacom, within the medical process, because they're all employees and not their own company, and they're part of the huge conglomerate. He'll have told you this. There was so much red tape to get through for all these guys. There were like 7 parties involved, different departments, and they all needed, they had to present to them all the whole time and produce the protocols and get it all ticked off. But I think it's brilliant that they're back. Golden Boy back tomorrow night. Eddie Hearn in a week's time. DAZN are back and growing over here.
Back.
Bellator back. Boxing and everything.
They just finished 7 weeks in a row doing 13 shows in 7 weeks. So
exactly.
Top Rank, they'll take a little bit of a break, but they're back for 3 shows in August. They got the one, they just announced the opponents today for the August 15th show with a doubleheader with Carl Frampton in the main event, Michael Conlon, that'll be on the 15th. It'll take place in London in the BT studio. We'll get it here in America live on ESPN in the afternoon. And then they also are going to do shows on the 22nd and 29th of August with the rescheduled Ramirez Postol fight and the rescheduled Joe Smith Jr. Elite Storm Alvarez fight. So like you said, all the groups are back. And by the way, that's only half of the PBC fights because their broadcast partner is Fox. And you can, by process of elimination of the main name guys that you did not hear on the Showtime schedule, you can be sure that they'll appear on the Fox schedule or Fox pay-per-view. Guys like Errol Spence, Sean Porter, Danny Garcia, who will probably fight each other, Manny Pacquiao, a whole slew of those types of fighters, Caleb Plant, you name it, all these other top guys that are on the PBC roster, you know that they're going to wind up on the Fox. They have a real sort of stranglehold on the welterweight division. You can be sure you'll see some of those guys back. And so, I don't think that Heyman and PBC wanted to step on each other. So that Showtime took the lead. They went through their process of announcing things this week, and probably next week we'll hear from the Showtime, from the Fox PBC side of what they're going to do, because I don't think their events are going to start probably not until the late part of August, not the early part of August. So Showtime's first out of the gate, and then we'll see the other guys back with, I believe their first fight is already sort of known as a rescheduled fight between Jamal James and Thomas Delorme for the interim title or whatever in the welterweight division, but forget the title at stake. It's just a good, solid matchup.
You make it sound, and it is incredibly busy, but
it's good after all these months of nothingness.
No, but Dan, all those fights, all these great names, all these young prospects, all these guys that have got careers ahead of them coming back. But where did we start?
It all leads up to Roy Jones against
where do we start and where are we going to finish it? Iron Mike Tyson versus Roy Jones Jr., September the 12th, Carson, California. I've got this nagging suspicion that you and I may end up there.
Well, if we do, we're going to have a big, long hug and a nice, tall drink.
I can't, but I'm going to go and watch one of their best fights of each of them right now, actually.
All right, so before we finish up, tell me, if you're going to go watch a singular Roy Jones fight and a singular Mike Tyson fight just for entertainment value, what would you watch? I'll let you think about it, and I'll tell you the two, or you want to go first?
No, I know which. I'm going to watch his heavyweight world title win.
Oh, against John
Ruiz.
Brilliant performance. Not a very exciting fight, but a great performance.
Yeah. That's what he's going to have to do against Mike Tyson for 3 rounds.
Could be. I think if I was picking a fight for Roy Jones at a sheer brilliance of boxing, I might go with the Ruiz fight, possibly the James Toney fight.
I knew you'd pick James Toney fight.
That's a little more action-packed, a little more exciting. I might go for the first fight against Tarver. We had to really dig down, but still won the fight in an exciting fight. And if it's Mike Tyson, man, I think I'm going
to watch the very first fight against Trevor Berbick. I'm going to watch the 2 rounds of mayhem that we keep seeing little clips of on the pads when he's with Rafael Cordero.
the funny thing is, the most exciting fights that Mike was in, he lost, and that's probably the first Holyfield fight.
Yes.
Yeah. So if I want to watch a fight that Mike won, I'd probably go the route of either Berbick. You could go Larry Holmes, but I mean, I've taken pisses longer than that fight. maybe the Larry Holmes fight, maybe the Berbick fight.
I'll just leave it at that. I'm not going to embarrass myself in there, and he won't.
We'll see.
Mike Tyson gets knocked out by Roy Jones. He's going out on a shield. But it's probably the weirdest conversation I've ever had with you, talking about Roy Jones Jr. and Mike Tyson fighting.
We've had some weirder conversations when you've been drunk, but we won't go there.
No, not now. Not now. Listen, it's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
I'll see you for show 20 tomorrow when we're going to answer everyone's questions, yeah?
Sounds
so send
good.
us loads of questions. Send us loads of questions about Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. as well, of course.
All right, signing off. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
See you later, brother. Thank you.
You bet.